Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this video. Whether you're hearing about relicensing for the first time or if you've been following this journey with us for 13 years, welcome. We're happy to have you come and learn more. My name is Nina Gordon-Kirsch, and I'm the River Steward in Massachusetts. And today I'm joined by Kathy Erfer and Marilla Harris-Vincent, who are the Vermont and New Hampshire River Stewards, respectively. Together, the three of us are going to get you up to speed on what's happening with relicensing at this point in time and tell you how you can plug into this very last comment period over the past 13-year journey that we are on. First, I'm going to present us in the geography of what we're looking at. So the Connecticut River is highlighted here on the map, and we're concerned with 5 hydropower facilities that are in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts that are all up for relicensing right now. In Vermont and New Hampshire, the facilities are run by Great River Hydro, Wilder Dam, Bellows Falls Dam, and Vernon Dam. In Massachusetts, the facilities are run by FirstLight Power Company and are called Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Facility and Turner's Falls Dam. So why should you care about this? Well, first of all, this impacts a huge area of our river. 175 miles of the Connecticut River in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And a lot of towns are also impacted. 16 towns in Vermont, 14 towns in New Hampshire, and 5 towns in Massachusetts. This impacts both recreation and ecological life in all these towns. The licensing process takes a long time, as we've already seen, and the new license is going to last for anywhere between 30 and 50 years, and that's a really long time. So this is our once-in-a-generation opportunity to have an impact on how our rivers are cared for the next 50 years. And the hydropower operations significantly impact the river. They set out how much water is in the river, so that impacts recreation and boating and fishing abilities. And it also impacts ecological life like fish migration, as well as erosion and water quality issues. Now I'm going to hand it off to Kathy to talk more about the relicensing process.
Great. Thanks, Nina. So this licensing process is managed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. It began in 2012. And this, what we're talking about today, the draft environmental impact statement, is the last kind of piece in the puzzle that FERC needs to issue the final license. So from 2014 to 2019, the companies were required to do a bunch of studies to attempt to understand the impact of the facilities to recreation, critters, the river itself, habitat. In 2020, the final application was filed. And then in 2024, there was an opportunity to comment on the application itself. Where we're at now is FERC has just issued what's called an environmental impact statement, a draft environmental impact statement, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And then FERC will issue the license after this. And so the whole process has to consider a bunch of different things. And so FERC, there's equal consideration of all of these different ways that we use our environment. And then in addition to that requirement of FERC, there are other federal laws that have to be addressed, right? So some of them are listed here in this chart. And the thing that we're sort of focused on right now is the Environmental Policy Act, which is what requires the issuance of this draft environmental impact statement. And the environmental impact statement is supposed to look at the cumulative impact of all of the facilities together on environmental and social considerations. So some of the resource concerns that we've been concerned with and that are addressed in this environmental impact statement include things like erosion of the riverbanks, the movement of sediment in the river, the flows, like is there actually enough water to support life, access to recreation along the river in this 175-mile stretch of river, impacts to cultural resources like traditional indigenous sites, archaeological sites, impacts on endangered species, impacts on habitat, things like that. And so in the environmental impact statement, this draft, these would be the things that you could comment on to make sure that they're being properly addressed. I'll pass it off now to Marilla to talk a little bit about some of the details of some of those things.
So these are the critters that we see outlined in the draft environmental impact statement, and you can see what protections they're proposing and how they find that these facilities will impact each of these species. And it's important to note that all of these species that are discussed here are state listed, threatened, endangered, or proposed endangered. And kind of two of note, the Puritan tiger beetle, which is discussed in the FirstLight draft environmental impact statement, they do find that these would likely be adversely affected by the projects. And for dwarf wedge mussels, which are discussed in the Great River Hydro draft environmental impact statement, we are concerned about how the proposed operations will impact sediment transport and deposition on their habitat. But overall, the higher minimum flows and more stable water surface level water surface elevations are expected to be beneficial for these local wildlife and critters. And next, we've got the migratory species that we see in the river. And the sea lamprey, American eel, and American shad are the most common migratory species in the project boundaries. And the fish passage upgrades, which I'll talk about in the next slide, are generally designed to pass these three species. And then there are river herring and Atlantic salmon in the Connecticut River, but we rarely see them this high up in the watershed. And lastly, there's short-nosed sturgeon, which are federally endangered species, and FirstLight and Great River Hydro are handling protections for these species very differently. One of the other things that are discussed in the draft environmental impact statements is fish passage, and in both cases, improvements are just going to take way too long. So in the fish passage settlement agreement, Great River Hydro has outlined taking up to 16 years to install the upgraded facilities and 9 years for the fish elevator at Turner's Falls, and that's just too long. Furthermore, the passage of these facilities is ineffective and unsafe because it's generally not suitable for the species that are actually migrating up and down the river. So for example, at the Vernon Dam, the ladder was built to pass Atlantic salmon, but they're not really migrating up there anymore. So it does pass sea lamprey, shad, and American eel, but not as effectively as it could. And there was recent eDNA evidence discovered in 2024 showing that endangered short-nosed sturgeon are up to the Bellows Falls Dam, but throughout this whole process, there's kind of been a lack of consideration for adequate passage for these species. There's a need for more water below the Turner's Falls Dam, and Nina will touch on this a little bit later. We also want to see that the salmon dam at Bellows Falls is removed, and that's universally supported. But there's contention about who is going to fund those removal efforts. The barrier net at the Northfield Mountain Dam is ineffective. It's just not clear that it's doing what it's supposed to, and we need more adaptive management measures at this facility. And the draft environmental impact statement, we feel inappropriately minimizes the impact of these dams on declining migratory fish species in the watershed. They impact, over 175 miles of habitat that otherwise would be viable for these species. So there's this through line throughout the draft environmental impact statements of diminishing the effects of these projects.
So just to dig in a little bit more detail on some of the things regarding the Great River Hydro projects in Vermont and New Hampshire, there was a change in operations, which we agree with and we think will be better for the river. But that change was done kind of at the end of the study process. And so there was no analysis done as to understand what the change in operations would do regarding erosion or sediment transport. And so we want some more analysis of that done and constraints built into the license to make sure that there are not unintended adverse impacts from that change. We are asking for additional recreation sites. There are some things provided to make improvements to existing recreational sites. Those recreational sites have been around for a long time, and we really need equitable access across the 30 towns for people to be able to get to the river and use the river. And the other thing is that the way it's set up right now, they're requiring a recreation plan after the license is issued, which makes it much harder to enforce. And so we would really like some detailed requirements for recreation included as part of the license. As Marilla mentioned, allowing 16 years to upgrade the fish ladders to improve them for fish passage for the species of concern is too long. And so we would really like that to be shortened. And then because of the new evidence, the eDNA evidence of the presence of, it's positive proof of short-nosed sturgeon living between the Bellows Falls Dam and the Vernon Dam, and between the Vernon Dam and the Turners Falls Dam, something needs to be done to protect those species. And so no studies were done for Great River Hydro for those species as part of the relicensing. And the draft environmental impact statement says it's okay that there's no Section 7 consultation. And so we disagree with that. And we think that the federal government actually needs to be much more protective of the existence of the short-nosed sturgeon in this part of the river. I'll pass it over to Nina to talk about some of the specifics around the FirstLight projects.
So some of the project concerns are similar to Great River Hydro, such as taking short-nosed sturgeon into consideration. And then there's other particularities in Massachusetts that are specific to these sites, such as this photo that is shown on this slide. This is the river below Turners Falls Dam. As you can see, there's exposed rock and riverbed, and that is because a lot of the water from the Connecticut River gets taken out of the river and put into a power canal to produce hydropower. And one of our big concerns is the water level below Turners Falls Dam in this section of the river that is dewatered. The new license with the settlement agreements is allowing for 500 cubic feet per second between July 1st and November 15th, and we're advocating for 1,400 CFS. Another issue is about erosion above the Turners Falls Dam, where Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Facility operates and takes water out of the river and puts it up into a reservoir and then runs the water back down into the river to create energy. And this amount of water influx and outflux from the river causes the stream banks to erode into the river. So we're wanting to have operational limits so that the river height stays within a particular range. And we're also asking for long-term monitoring of erosion. As Marilla mentioned, adjustments need to be made for the barrier net, such as more studies on its efficacy and longer-term monitoring. Currently, there's no monitoring required after 20 years, and for the remaining 20 to 40 years of operation, we won't know if the barrier net is still working correctly or not. And we also want there to be studies done about the newly found sturgeon in that area above the dam, as well as the timeline for installation to be shorter. And we also want timeline of the fish lift at Turners Falls Dam to be shorter as well, because we've talked to experts who say it doesn't actually need to take that long. And I'll hand it off to Marilla.
The draft environmental impact statements were issued on May 30th, and just to remind everyone, the comment period is open until 5 p.m. Eastern Time on July 29th, and FERC will be holding 2 in-public comment sessions. For the FirstLight facilities, it'll be in Greenfield on the July 16th, and for the Great River Hydro facilities, it'll be in Bellows Falls on July 17th, and this is an opportunity to share your comments in person, but you can also submit them online. And there will not be a formal presentation but there will be staff available there to answer any questions that you have about this environmental review process. After they've received all the comments, we're expecting that the final environmental impact statement will be issued sometime in late 2025, early 2026. And then we think that in late 2026 or 2027, FERC will likely issue a new license for all 5 facilities. And this is, what we've all been waiting for. But we'll keep you updated on all of these dates. So as Nina mentioned earlier, this period that we're currently in is really important because it's the last public comment opportunity in this very long relicensing process. So a big thank you to those who've been following along and commenting for 13 years. And for those of you who are new, this is your time to share your thoughts and concerns about these projects. And it really is important for the public to be involved every step of this way. So we appreciate you joining us today. It's really powerful when we all collectively engage in these public procedures and advocate for our rivers and our communities. So to learn more about this specific relicensing process, background information, and CRC's main concerns in more detail than what we've outlined in this video, you can visit our Hydropower website. And you can find all of the documentation there, like final applications, water quality certificates, the draft environmental impact statements, and all of our comments that we've submitted to FERC and the state agencies. And then if you haven't already, I'd highly suggest that you sign up for our hydropower newsletters. This is where we share updates on the hydropower relicensing and important dates like the public comment sessions on the 16th and 17th. And then you can also subscribe to the FERC dockets if you want even more information. And they'll send you specific things about these 5 facilities that you subscribe for. And lastly, I just want to, enforce that we are a resource. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. This is a really complicated process and we're here to help you. We're glad to speak with you as an individual. We're happy to talk to groups and just unpack this whole process so that we all have equitable access and information to help protect this public trust resource. So thanks again for listening.